Well, welcome back to Morning Live. Now, the Department of Employment and Labour says that South Africa attracts the largest number of migrants on the continent. The National Labour Migration Policy, which will introduce maximum quotas on the total number of documented foreign nationals with work visas, is being discussed. Now, the bill has been published and is open for 90 days for the public and interested stakeholders to comment. Employment and Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi joins us now virtually to talk more about this. Minister Nxesi, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you. Good morning, Sakina, and to the viewers.
Minister, let's just talk briefly about what the objective is here. What is this bill intended to do?
Well, Sakina, if you think about the expectations from South Africans regarding the access to the opportunities, and also given the worsening unemployment in the country, there is a perception that the labor market has been distorted. Distorted in which sense? In the sense that most of the employers prefer to take the semi-skilled migrant workers and do not pay them as per the agreements and the laws. It's more about exploiting them because they are desperate. In that sense, those desperate workers are ready to take 20 rands instead of 50 rands. And that seriously distorts the labor market. And this is happening in what you would call semi-skilled areas, whereas you have lots of South Africans who can be able to do those jobs. And one example is, if you look into the security sector, you look into the farming sector, you look into the hospitality and the restaurants, you look into the retail, it's starting to creep in. So there are those sectors where this thing is happening, which tends to displace the South Africans. And because they are distorting this thing, it's happening even in tourism. But also, if you look into the area of what I would say in the trade, in the rural areas, in the townships, you will find that there's a serious problems of where the Pakistani nationals have literally taken over and the municipalities have not played their oversight role. So what we are trying to do is to say, what are the critical skills we can be able to get? And that's why we've drawn that. And where we say you can recruit those people within a particular arrangement. But what are the areas we can ring fence and say at least so many South Africans should be employed into this? So we're having pressures of unemployment, whereas there are jobs which could be performed by the South Africans. But what we would not do is to totally cut out the migrant laborers, because the law will not allow us to do. So we are trying to amend the law to cater for the South Africans, but at the same time, make sure that we balance it with the international treaties and conventions which we have signed, which are relating to the rights of the migrants and even the refugees.
Minister, you said there seems to be a perception of distortion in the labour market. Is it really a perception, given that there are tons of actual practical examples of this abound?
Sometimes, Sakina, it is a perception because you hear people saying, these foreigners are taking our jobs. Sometimes we have been having problems with the trucking industry. And just one example, we had a roadblock with Home Affairs with the police in Middelburg in the Cape. And of the 300 trucks, it was only 2 trucks where we got people with illegal permits or without the valid documents. And clearly, but when it is articulated, it's like all these foreign drivers have taken our jobs and so on. So it's a perception sometimes. But we can't just sit and say we're not going to address that, because in some areas, you are correct, it's real. You do have companies who are doing exactly what we are talking about. So we must address both these perceptions and deal with the expectations of our people. But indeed, the labor market has been distorted by what some of the employers have done. And the perception is it's the foreign workers, whereas the reality, it is the employers who are responsible for this chaos.
So coming to the employers, what is the department doing to actually dissuade that sort of action and activity? The example of Huawei comes to mind most readily. That's most recent, one of the big stories that have blown up. So how far are you with that situation in trying to rectify it with that company, Minister?
We've had a number of inspections. This might not be enough in the different sectors. Remember that we're not just dealing with one, we're dealing with more than 2 million employers, and we have only 1,000 inspectors. But the reality is that we are dealing with a situation where some of the employers, even if we've been able to find them or discover that they've not gone according to the law, the fine is so little, it's so small, in fact. For instance, one example which I can tell you, it's about the dispute we've had with Huawei, where they had more than 90% of their workers coming from China, and they didn't give us any plan on how to train the South Africans. And they know that the fine is going to be 1.5 million, and that's peanuts to them. Now we are looking into, over and above the inspections, can we be able to amend the law and come up with very heavy fines in order to deter this? Because to some of them, 1 million or 1.5 million is just chips. So it's massive inspections, working together with the Home Affairs, working with the police, and of course, adding to that, we will have to deal with the heavy fines. We have a whole program which we're rolling out from province to the province. We even call it Ilima, where we pull all the inspectors from the different provinces into one and have a focused program in that particular province.
Minister, in as much as I'm trying to get excited about what you're saying, it's very difficult, because I'm reminded of back when I was still doing a radio show on Metro FM, where we were talking about employment equity, and we were talking about the exact same things that you and I are discussing right now, where we were talking about how employers actually budget for these fines because they are so ludicrously low. They budget for these fines, so it's no skin off their nose. We spoke about that then. We're still talking about it now. Back then, we spoke about the fact that you did not have enough inspectors. And now, today, 2022, 1st of March, we're still talking about the same thing. 1,000 inspectors for 2 million businesses. Does that not, in some way, say that government perhaps is not as serious as it should be about tackling this problem?
Sakina, if we did announce, we in the department, through the government, we have added 500 inspectors in this financial year, and this is going to continue depending on the availability of the resources. But what is key is we're going to rely on what I would call complying employers. We're going to rely on the trade unions, on the shop stewards, on the factory floor. We're not going to do it alone as government. But as you have indicated that they budget for this, we need to come up with a combination of measures, including the right to trade, where we can close some of those companies if they do this repeatedly. We must just be heavy now, and we have the experience on how they are behaving. We have to close all those loopholes. But what we must accept, if you have in the public service about 1 million employers, you can't have in the department 1 million, labor inspectors. We must accept that. It's not going to happen. But look at a combination of the different strategies.
So back in 2017, you had several JSE-listed companies who actually had fallen foul of the law, and companies were fined for not complying with the Employment Equity Act. That was in 2017. A company like Huawei, they've been asked repeatedly to correct what is wrong. And again, Minister, here we are in 2022. The same problem persists. Inspire confidence in us as South Africans that you are actually serious about dealing with this problem.
Sakina, that's why we've gone to court. Our first step, through our inspectors, we are able to come and give notices on the issues they have to correct. Our second step is to go and check if they've done that. And then after that, after the first corrective measures, we go for the punitive measures. That's why we've gone to court. But I think part of what we are trying to do now, it's going to be heavy fines, including restricting people to do business if they are not complying with the law. That's what we can do, but we can't do it arbitrarily. We will have to make sure that our law should be biting now, and we think that they will stop all those activities or violations which they are doing. But we will have to work together with everybody in society, and we still say there are responsible employers who are able to work with us. There are responsible trade unions, shop stewards on the shop floor who become the whistleblowers on the wrong things which are happening, and we are able to run into those particular places. So we have to deal with what I would call the hotspots. But I think the issue of heavy fines, we will not avoid it.
Mm-hmm. Now, Minister, do we have a sense of how many documented foreign nationals we have in South Africa and the estimated number of undocumented ones?
The Department of Home Affairs will be able to give us that information, but at this stage, I don't have from the top of my head. I know that when we're doing the presentation, in terms of the 2017 statistics, we had close to 4 million of the people who were coming from outside, which has gone up considerably from the previous years. We don't know as of now what the census will be telling us, but I know that in our document we did have some of the figures, but Home Affairs will be better placed, because one of the problems we've been talking about, Sakina, is the issue of our porous borders. When we're dealing with this, we're leading this what we call a process together with Minister Mzwaledi, the Home Affairs Minister, and together with about other 11 ministers. And one of the areas we were focusing in was the issue of the porous borders. The Border Management Agency, which Minister Mzwaledi has started putting it together now, has appointed top officials, has come with a structure, because as long as our borders are porous, we don't know who's coming in and out. We're going to continue to have this particular problem.
So you mentioned earlier, Minister, about ring fencing certain categories of jobs or maybe industries for the benefit of South Africans. So can we just talk a little bit more about that? Because it's not the first time that you've mentioned this, but South Africa is, of course, bound by certain laws and constitutional constraints, a discussion that you and I have had previously. But let's just highlight that again. You know, what is the situation? What do you think should be done in this instance?
Sakina, the Ministry of Home Affairs, together with Higher Education, Science and Technology, they've come up with what is known as the critical or scarce and critical skills list. These are the skills, like when you're talking about all sorts of engineers, you're talking about in the financial services, you're talking actuaries, you're talking chartered accountants, and so on and so on. You're talking planners, economists, and so on. So those are the areas where we're saying it's critical list. When people are coming from outside, they can be allowed to come in. But there are those where people are semi-skilled. But the reality is, We cannot totally ban the people. That would be illegal. Our constitution would not allow us. Our laws will not allow us. But what we can do, we can be able to say, let's regulate it and talk about maybe particular percentage which can be allowed sector by sector. And we cannot say that one size fits all. What is happening in agriculture will be different from what is happening in the retail, what will be happening in the security. Because exactly of what we are saying, we have the constitution, we have the international treaties and protocols which we have signed at the level of the UN, at the ILO and so on. So we need to have a balancing act and making sure that we respect all those. That's very critical, but at the same time, we have to deal with the issue of our borders. And remember, I was saying, there's free trade now. We have had an African, what we call a trade agreement. And that trade agreement, it means our goods and services are going into the continent. There is no way that we can close that trade. It also means a free movement of people, but a controlled movement of people. And we can't be just an island. We will have to trade our economies linked to the continent. So these are all the areas. So that balancing act is important. But what it means, it doesn't mean that if there's going to be free trade, then it means we're talking about borderless countries. No, we're still different sovereign states with the borders which must be looked after.
So, Minister, in terms of the bill that's open for comment at the moment, just to give people a sense of what is contained in it, because also important to point out, this is not the first time that we've come up with laws of this kind in the country. And without necessarily belaboring too much the point of Huawei, 90% foreigners employed there. They've not only breached the Employment Equity Act, but also they have employees there that do not have work permits. So it's not the first time that we've come up with laws, but companies break it willfully and they're willing to pay the fine. So how is this particular law going to be different?
First of all, Sakina, what we are doing, there are certain principles which we have put there, which we've been talking about, that the issue of respecting the human rights for all, the issue of respecting the international conventions, the issue of our constitution, I've said that, and the basic laws, but also the expectations from the South Africans. What we intend doing is to amend the law, certain aspects where we have to amend the law and allow for the minister in particular to be able to set up those quotas. And we want to hear the public, we want to hear the various stakeholders, including the unions. What are their proposals in terms of the quotas? And what we have said we need to focus on as the different sectors, is that enough for those sectors? That's where we are going. Which aspects of the law do we need to amend? We have put them, those aspects of the law. For instance, we are focusing more on the Employment Act, that it needs to be very clear about the issue of the national and the local or the national workers and the issue of the foreign workers. So those are the aspects we are focusing on. And we've given people almost 90 days. In fact, it's 90 days. The public consultation will take that maximum of 90 days. And we're allowing for this extensive, and we're making a call, therefore, that everybody else must look at that document, very simplified, and then they are able to make their comments.
And certainly looking forward to it and having many more discussions. But just the final one, Minister. All of that is good and well. You can have that legislation passed. But as we've seen in the past, it means nothing. It comes to naught if you are not able to implement it correctly and if you are not able to monitor and evaluate that companies are actually sticking to this. So what are you going to do with regard to that?
This means, Sakina, we have to strengthen our enforcement through the inspectorate. That's what it means. For instance, as you were saying, we've been able to find people who are violating in terms of the employment equity. And that has been done by our inspectors. And so they've been able to be successful and expose what is not happening, which is supposed to happen in some of the companies. So we are going to be increasing or strengthening our enforcement. And clearly, the number of the inspectors has to be increased in order to deal with this particular challenge. But it's going to need us to work together with the industries, with the stakeholders in the form of the unions, including the public.
Minister, we'll have more conversations in this 90-day period, no doubt, because I think it's a very important piece of legislation that needs to be looked at, and it does require all of South Africa to give their input. Thanks so much for your time this morning.